Today, we're talking about if Myles Turner maybe has a little longer term future with the Pacers based on some reporting from Marc Stein. Plus, we'll get into the season reviews for some guys who barely played for the Pacers this year, like Tristan Thompson, Nate Hinton. We'll blow through a bunch of those guys, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, we are diving into a report about Myles Turner and the Pacers from Marc Stein about potential, maybe a longer-term Myles Turner with the Pacers, what it all means, all the factors at play, at least to me, and what could potentially happen here between Turner and the Pacers and maybe an extension. Then we'll continue reviewing the seasons of Pacers players, but because we're doing a whole segment dedicated to not that, we're going to do some rapid-fire ones today. So we'll do all the guys who played in 5 or less games for the Pacers this year: Nate Hinton, Tristan Thompson, Gabe York, DeJon Jarreau, Ahmad Caver, and Reggie Perry, who all had an impact on this Pacers season. And a couple of these guys I actually want to mention as maybe having a future with the franchise. Always fun to talk about their free agency prospectus. They are all 6 free agents this summer. Let's start with the big one, though. Turner, Myles Turner stuff. I'm way late to covering this. Marc Stein wrote about this right about when the Nets got eliminated, late April. I think April 26th or 25th. You can read it in his Marc Stein Substack, What's Next for Nash and the Nets. But on Myles Turner, Marc Stein says the following. Sources say the Pacers do hope to keep Turner long-term after they previously weighed Turner-centric trades going back to last summer. Indiana instead traded former All-Star forward Domantas Sabonis to Sacramento. Turner has 1 season left on his current contract at $18 million. So, I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Interesting here that the Pacers, or Stein's reporting is interesting to me that the Pacers would have interest in keeping Turner long-term. That makes sense to me. Turner is still only 26, matches up with the timeline of their young guys, has positive value, fits well with Tyrese Haliburton and Chris Duarte, has never played with Haliburton. That's something the Pacers would surely like to see. So, of course, the Pacers would like to keep him long-term despite him only having 1 year left on his deal. And this is important because Turner, while not being a free agent on July 1st, when the calendar reaches July 1st, I've explained this on the show a few times, but we'll get into the weeds again right now, is eligible for a contract extension. He is not eligible till July 1st. But he is again eligible once the league calendar rolls over to next year. So how this works is they could either do a restructure, a renegotiation, and extension is what it's called, where they could jack up his first year value of his deal and then really suppress the final years of the contract. So use their cap space now to have him on a cheap contract later, or they could just do a standard veteran extension where they can, and those renegotiation extensions are super rare, or they could do a standard veteran extension, which usually happens, and give him more years on his contract, maybe a pay bump. They could give him up to a 20% raise. Remember, they gave Malcolm Brogdon a veteran extension last year when they tacked on 2 extra years onto his contract. And while that obviously did not pan out the way they would have hoped, although it's still a good contract for Brogdon, the reasons they extended Brogdon are pretty similar to the reasons they would want to consider extending Myles Turner. Because at this stage, going into last year, Brogdon had a couple years left. So not stunningly long, like they could have kept him around, but it certainly upped his value and upped his commitment to the Pacers, having 2 more years on his deal. So from a Pacers perspective, there are a couple things that they would want to do by having Turner on. They could up his value in a trade if they extend him, because now he's an expiring contract, and expiring contracts have more value sometimes, but usually that's because the team receiving the expiring contract player are getting cap relief at the end of the season, and the team trading away that player receives bad money. If you're trading that player in just a normal trade, they don't have positive value in that way. They actually have less value because they become a rental. So by adding years to Turner's deal, he would become more valuable as a trade asset. That's one pro for a Pacers team that has a pretty fluid roster situation. The other pro, obviously, is that you get Myles Turner under contract for more seasons, one of the best 15 defensive players in the entire NBA, maybe even a higher number than that as of now. Really, like we talked about on yesterday's show, really, really strong to start this past season for 2 months. Was that 3-and-D guy, hitting 37% of his threes, more confidence off the dribble, added some counters when he got run off the three-point line. Right, that's a valuable player, and he fits extremely well with Tyrese Haliburton's speed and ability to get guys the ball above the rim. His defense would super help the struggles they had at the end of last season. There are a million reasons to keep him around. And so it makes sense why the Pacers would want to keep him long term. And the other factor I want to bring up here is really quickly in favor of an extension is, Turner might want it now, at least maybe a short 1 year extension because Domantas Sabonis has been traded. And if you'll recall, look, it didn't end up being a topic for this team because they ended up changing their entire roster and COVID hit them really hard and they had injuries all right after this happened. But Turner publicly said on the record, I want a bigger role in the NBA. And he would like it to be with the Pacers, but he wanted a bigger role. And he never got to play for the team once that opportunity opened up with Sabonis traded. But he spoke at his exit interview about how excited he was for the opportunity to be playing his natural position of 5 on offense, right? All this stuff that would be exciting to him. That could entice and be a reason for him to want to sign an extension is being in that sort of environment with a franchise he likes, in a situation he likes, playing the position he likes, right? All of that would be appealing to him. So it's not just, this could not just be the Pacers saying we want him longer term and then there's no reason for Turner to do it. Like in theory, there are reasons for him to do it. Now there's a lot of, as usual with every roster decision, cons that have to be considered, right? And I talked about this on yesterday's show, but Turner's kind of the litmus test for me on what direction the Pacers are heading. He's only 26. He fits the timeline of their young core, but also is, a vet for sure. 7-year pro, 8-year pro. I should know that. Been in the league for a while, right? Maybe not necessarily straight on the same timeline as, especially on an expiring deal, guys like Halliburton and Duarte. So if they decide to keep him longer term, maybe that means they're trying to be a little bit better. If they don't, if they move on from him for assets, that could mean that they are going a little more rebuilding next year. He's kind of a good litmus test for that stuff, and that's why there's a bunch of considerations for him with an extension as well. And the direction the Pacers are headed could be important to him. Like if the Pacers do want to, take a year, not a year off, but like a gap year to get a little more stuff before they really go for it and try to improve the team around Halliburton before they have to pay him. That might not be appealing to Myles Turner, who is 26 and has yet to be in the second round of the postseason, right? He might not want that. So that's something they'll have to consider and discuss with him. And then another factor here is, I'm going to steal a line from someone I was messaging today, but, Turner, this is a consideration for the Pacers. Turner is really good, obviously. He's a starting level center. And as solid as Isaiah Jackson and Goga Batadze were this past season, I was talking to Scott McNeilis, my fellow Capdork of Pacerland. We were talking about bringing him in, and a part of this too with Isaiah Jackson and Goga is like, yeah, they're good, but are you really ready for them to be your starting bigs next year, especially if you're trying to win? Like that is risky. That is not something to me that the Pacers would want to do. So even if you like those guys, it's not really time for them. They're not ready to be the full 48 minutes. So a Turner deal, as Scott puts this well, would kind of be a rebuild by nature. Like you're still giving them more minutes and ramping it up, but not in the same exact way as just throwing them into the fire, right? So it still allows the Pacers to kind of toe both timelines, which could be helpful for both. But they still need to play those young guys, right? So if the Pacers would like to give Jackson and Goga serious minutes next year, extending Turner may not be the move. So here's where the rubber meets the road. What would happen here, right? The Pacers would like to keep him longer term. It still allows them to have both be on a rebuilding timeline because his trade value goes up, but he's only 26. It also allows them to be in a competing timeline because they keep a good player. For Turner, he finally could, at least in theory, when the season starts, have the role he wants. He gets to play with a team that fits him very well, with the franchise he likes, right? There are a lot of reasons for both parties to want this. Now, for Turner, though, he is 26, so a long extension could take him past his prime. And then he would be a free agent unrestricted for the first time of his career, like 28 or 29. I don't know if he'd want it to be that late. That's why I think a short extension makes the most sense here, because then also it allows the Pacers to bridge the gap for Isaiah Jackson and Goga Batadze a little more, and then Turner could become a free agent maybe 27 or 28, which would be more valuable to him and his long-term growth. So to me, what makes the most sense, as Marc Stein reported, again, it sounds more like a Pacers-sided statement to me, not that it's coming from the Pacers or anything like that. Just what it says is the Pacers do hope to keep Turner long-term. So maybe that means they want to re-sign him in free agency 2 years from now. There's a lot of stuff at play here, but just in the scope of this offseason, I think a 1 or 2 year extension, similar to what happened to Brogdon last year, makes a lot of sense. And even if they wanted, they did Brogdon's deal the day before the season started, or 2 days before. And what ended up happening with that is, if you do those veteran extensions, you can't trade that player for 6 months. And so Brogdon, 6 months from when he signed it, was past the trade deadline, so he cannot be traded. If the Pacers do this earlier in the offseason, that would not be a thing in this case. So Turner could still get the money he wants, have his value go up, and be a free agent when he wants. Like, it could be a win for everybody to do this somewhat early in the free agency process just for that timeline. But if Turner doesn't want to get traded, maybe he'll put it off, whatever. But I think a short extension like Brogdon's, a 2-year deal at about what he makes now, maybe a little more makes sense. Because if they do the veteran extension, they can give him a 20% pay bump that could get him up to $21.6 million in the first year of an extension. That seems about right for Myles Turner to me, just looking back at last summer. And look, Jarrett Allen became an all-star, but he got 5 years, $100 million last summer as a very strong starting caliber center. And remember, a lot of people were like, that's too rich for him. And he's seriously outplayed that, like significantly outplayed that deal. But that is a good starting caliber centers market right now. $20 million a season at that age. Jarrett Allen, a little younger than Myles Turner, but not too much younger. You know, another guy the Cavs signed, ironically, when looking at bigs from last summer, the Cavs are the team to go to, Lauri Markkanen. The start of his deal was at about 16.7, 16.8 million. And he was pretty good for the Cavs too, but at the time viewed as an imperfect kind of stretch 4 shooter type. And then he became more than that still. But if that an imperfect shooter type is what he's viewed at, like Turner's better than that now. So I think 20 million for Turner, given the current market of the NBA, and I know some people will think that's too much, but like adjust to the modern NBA guys, that makes sense to me. That is what he is worth. In the like solid starting centers are worth solid starters at any position are worth 20 million, but centers, the market right now is about 20 million. So Turner may not want that necessarily because he could up his value this season beyond that now that he could be featured as a center. But given how the last couple of years have gone for him with the injuries, he asked for the bigger role. He'll finally get it. The Pacers, it makes sense to kind of bridge a rebuild. Thank you, Scout, for the perfect wording there. I think this does all make sense. That in theory, if the Pacers and Turner find the right money value, they could come to a 1 or 2 year, like 38 to $40 million extension. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I wanted to talk about it since it was in the news, as they say, and it was a good time to do it. So that's something to keep an eye on this summer. And once free agency is done and the Pacers cap situation is more clear, I will do a full podcast on extensions for all the extension eligible guys. Myles Turner will be one of them. Goga Bitadze will be one of them. Buddy Hield will actually become extension eligible on July 1st as well. Maybe other guys, if trades happen, we'll see. But those are the 3 for now. So that's where Myles is at now. Good time to report on it with Marc Stein dropping some knowledge bombs on us. Subscribe to the Steinline Substack. Marc Stein, veteran NBA reporter who is excellent at what he does. So let's pivot back to more season reviews, a la like we did yesterday with Turner, Sabonis, and Goga Bitadze, and do some more season reviews, this time for the crew that I couldn't really put in a group. I put randoms above their names in my sheet. One of the groups is called the greater than 1, less than 5 game crew. The other one is called the 1 game crew. We'll talk about all of them. And I know that they might not sound like the most interesting guys' seasons to review, but their free agencies are interesting, especially for 2 guys who are restricted free agents, could in theory be back with the Pacers next year. That is interesting and a part of the Pacers offseason. Let's talk about that. Before we do, though, really quick, I want to talk about BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, and this weekend's run to the Roses as the Kentucky Derby is back. It's all there over at BetOnline. Plus, they've got some new crazy odds on there. They've got NBA championship exact matchups, the favorites right now. Dead tied is Suns Celtics and Suns Heat. They've got finals MVP lines, Steph Curry and Devin Booker, the 2 favorites there. They even have lines for the Lakers next head coach next year with Darvin Ham, Terry Stotts, and Steve Clifford leading the way. Pacers guard Mark Jackson is on there. LeBron James is even on there. It's a crazy, crazy list. If you want to go look at it, that's all over at BetOnline.net, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, playoffs, esports, baseball, and more. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at BetOnline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, a new one, Locked On NBA Big Board, one of our multiple NBA draft podcasts here at the Locked On Network. Tons of draft analysts who go to some of these combine events and some of these draft workouts can give you all the details on so many prospects. And the Pacers have 3 picks in this draft, including their most important draft pick of my entire life. You'll want to check that out if you are a fan of the NBA draft. Let's talk about some guys who played in more than 1 game, but less than 5 games for the Pacers this year. And 2 of them could, in theory, be restricted free agents this summer. we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So this segment will be about Nate Hinton, Gabe York, and Tristan Thompson seasons and their potential future with the Pacers in 2 of those cases. We'll start with Tristan Thompson because he is not going to be a restricted free agent this summer and is not on a 2-way contract. In fact, he didn't even finish the season with the Pacers. Tristan Thompson played in 4 games for the team this year. He was a part of the salary the Pacers needed to get to accomplish the Sabonis-Tyrese Haliburton trade. And he actually played okay in those 4 games. If you'll recall, I thought he might not even show up and he would do a buyout right away. He showed up, all smiles, helped Tyrese Haliburton and Buddy Hield transition from Sacramento to Indiana by having more familiar faces around. And quite honestly, that might be more valuable than anything he did on the floor. Although, points per game, his highest of any team he was on this year, was with the Pacers. Rebounds per game, very close to being higher with the Pacers than other teams. Right? He played pretty well for the Pacers. Scoring 7.3 points per game was massive, if you'll recall, in one of their wins over the Wizards right before the All-Star break, before the buyout became official. And that was another thing he did that super helped the Pacers this year, is he took that buyout, which allowed them to have the wiggle room to be able to do things like convert their 2-way contracts at the end of the season, bring in Justin Anderson on some 10-day deals, which now he might have more of a future in the NBA or with the Pacers. He did a lot of helpful stuff with the Pacers just by existing in their ecosystem for 5 days, right? He played in 4 games from February 11th to February 16th, and yet still had a solid impact on their season from a cap perspective and from a trade transition perspective. And in that game against the Wizards, 17 points, 6 rebounds, +7. In fact, he was plus in 2 of the Pacers games that he played in. So Tristan Thompson was actually solid for the Pacers when they needed a veteran center after trading Sabonis and Turner was hurt. And I don't think that should be forgotten. Not a very mobile guy, not a good defender at all. In fact, the Bulls, he was awful for them. After taking part of their biannual exception, he played terrible for them. So the Pacers, who were not in a high-pressure situation or a playoff series, had to be happy with how he did for them. In terms of future with the Pacers, or something I learned from Tristan Thompson, this one's the hardest guy probably that I'll have to do, of anyone, because I can't use him as a free agent like I can with everyone else on this show. But I didn't learn a lot from him either, because he was only with the team for 6-ish days, a week, basically. I guess that the immobile bigs are pretty tough to use in the NBA these days, even though he's super solid on the glass. But he reinforces a point that a lot of people make all the time about how important vets can be to rebuilding or growing teams, right? They have a lot of value in those situations in terms of, sharing knowledge. He's won a title before. He's been on really good teams in Boston and Cleveland before. So sharing that knowledge with young guys, he's been around the league. He's seen it all. That kind of knowledge is helpful. And in this situation specifically, being a part of the trade, being that vet can be valuable as well, because he had been, I believe he'd been traded before. He had not been traded before, but he had been a part of good teams before, and that had a lot of value for this Pacers team. So on the court, immobile bigs, tough to be really good with them in the NBA these days, but off the court, extremely valuable and more proof that vets are needed on young teams. Gabe York and Nate Hinton. I'm lumping them together for just a second to say, I talked a lot about at the end of the season on this podcast, the rule in place that says you need a guy for 15 days rostered on your team or on a team. And then if he ends the season on a 2-way contract, he can be a restricted free agent. If it's less than 15 days, they can't be. However, I have heard that there's a chance that rule gets kind of tweaked and prorated this season because of all the hardship deals, because of how much roster turnover there was, and because the deadline for 2-way stuff has been changed. I don't know what the ruling on that is. I have not been able to get confirmation. But there's a chance, I bring that up, because Gabe York and Nate Hinton finished the season on 2-way deals. I don't know this yet, but there's a chance that they could have them as restricted free agents this year. And that would sort of change the calculus of their free agency. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both sides of this here because they finished the season with the team. But let's start with Nate Hinton, who I'm going to start with him because he's a much more interesting case of what his future is with the team, because he played for Carlisle his rookie year in Dallas, 21 games. He played a decent amount that season. He's a 100 minutes played guy in his career. Only 2 games for the Pacers this year. He had that 10-day stint during the COVID stretch where he played in 2 games before himself getting COVID for the last 2 games of the season, not being able to play. Put up no stats in his 2 minutes. 2 minutes played, 1 missed shot, 1 turnover, nothing else. So his NBA impact on the Pacers extremely small, a helpful practice guy, a helpful active player when they were really beat up in late December, early January. But all his value was shown in the G League, where there were some other G Leaguers on the Mad Ants lauding that he should have been on an all-defense team, Justin Anderson being one of them, if you will recall him with the Pacers this year. Nate Hinton is a really good defender at that level, and that's where most of his value resides as a prospect, right? Really good defensive prospect, good rebounder for a guard. And so with the Mad Ants this year, 9.5 rebounds per game for him. He's 6'5". So Terry Taylor is not impressed, but everyone else is impressed by that. 18 points, shot 38% on his threes on over 5 a game at the G League level, 46% shooting. Like, he's 23, so he's not like young anymore. But he at least is a decent level prospect, and that's why the Pacers wanted to scoop him up at the end of the season on that two-way. Carlisle really likes him and likes the way he's developing. So despite doing very, very little on the NBA court for the Pacers this year, really grew as a pro in general in his second year in his career. And I think that gives him at least a chance to either be on a two-way or in training camp for the Pacers next year as another one of those scrappy guards who can fight and prove his value, because maybe he hasn't shown a ton in the NBA yet, but he has shown in the G League level that his shot has really improved, his defense is really strong, and then he's got a unique skill set as a rebounding guard. And that's all stuff that could, in theory, translate. He was in training camp for the Pacers last year, if you recall, played in some preseason games for them, as well as those 2 games during the regular season. So Nate Hinton, not a ton of regular season value for the Pacers, but fantastic Mad Ant. And I think there's a chance that he could be someone they consider bringing back in because he's young and talented for camp or on a two-way next year. And if they can make him a restricted free agent, maybe that's something they consider just because they would like to have him back. They made Cassius Stanley a restricted guy off of his two-way last year, didn't end up bringing him back. Like, there's a little consequence there. So perhaps they pursue bringing him back. Maybe he plays in Summer League, for example, for the Pacers. That's a way that he could, continue to have an impact on this franchise going forward. Gabe York did not have the luxury of signing the 10-day mid-season contract with the Pacers. He instead signed with Orlando, but that ended up not working out. So he only played in 2 games for the Pacers, the final 2 games on a two-way deal. Made his NBA debut, scored some points, and Gabe York showed off some really shifty driving ability, right? Like, he could really get into the lane and make stuff happen. Like, NBA level driver. Like, he could get into the paint and break it down. Hit his only 2-point shot, missed a bunch of threes at the NBA level, but ended up scoring 8 points in 2 games, dishing out 4 assists, 2 steals. Like, showed that he could do enough that he belonged. He didn't embarrass himself or looked like someone totally lost and out of place in the NBA. Really athletic guard who can get to the bucket and score. That's why in the G League, 22 points per game for the Mad Ants this year, on very impressive above 50% on twos. Like, his three's not that great, but he could really get to the basket and fill it up as a scorer for them. Not a great passer at the G League level or rebounder, but he's a really good scorer, and I think he also has a shot to potentially be on the Pacers Summer League team to continue to kind of prove what he can be for the organization. I don't know if he'll be there or not. I don't know if Hinton will be there either, although both of them, if it is true that they are able to be restricted free agents, it would make some sense for the Pacers to want to bring them on to their Summer League team to maybe see what they could be in that setting. And I think Gabe York, probably a G League guy, not an NBA guy, but still in those last 2 games showed off an impressive driving ability and just in general skill set that he finally made the league and can handle it and get to the basket despite still struggling in general from the field. And in general, just not very good defender, but he did play against the Nets and the Sixers. So there are 3 other guys who played less than 5 games for the Pacers. The 3 we just talked about, Thompson, York, and Hinton, all played in more than 1 game. There are 3 guys that played in 1 game for the Pacers this year, and reviewing their seasons is very difficult because they only played 1 game. But one of these guys I actually think is an NBA level player who the Pacers could consider potentially looking at for some maybe fringe roster stuff or training camp stuff next season. So let's talk about the 3 guys who played in 1 game for the Pacers this season. But before we do that, let's talk about Rock Auto, who's bringing you this episode. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models of vehicles, it is impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. You got to endure the pointless questioning. It's intimidating from the guy behind the counter who's asking you about the specs of a vehicle that you have no idea what they are. Then they don't have the part in the store, so they got to order it, and you got to go back and get it. They only choose the brand their warehouse happens to carry. It's a miserable experience. Don't do that. You have a computer with access to rockauto.com in your house. You can do that and save time and money on rockauto.com. They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are always reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. And I might need a car battery soon, so I'm going to be heading to rockauto.com myself. You can explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thank you for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, jump on over to Locked On NBA, hear about the latest and greatest around the league. Heat win again. Suns and Mavs currently playing. They'll have all of it broken down over on the Locked On NBA podcast, plus the NBA coaching carousel. Continuing to spin. Names are coming up in Charlotte and LA. Let's talk about the three guys who played in one game for the Pacers this season, because I'm determined to review the season of everybody who signed a contract with the Pacers this season. If you can name all three, congratulations. I bet very many people do not remember them all. DeJon Jarreau is one of them. Reggie Perry is another one. And Ahmad Caver is the third one. DeJon Jarreau started the season on a two-way deal for the Pacers. Perry and Ahmad Caver were hardship contract signings when the Pacers really needed bodies. One of those guys stood out much, much more than the others to me. So we're going to do him last because his future in the league is a little bit more interesting to me. So let's start with DeJon Jarreau because he was interesting. He starts with the season with the Pacers on a two-way deal. And for a little bit looked like he could be sort of interesting, at Houston where he played in college, or at least where he finished in college. Was a strong defender, not necessarily the best scorer or anything like that, but had a really strong summer league with Miami that helped him, get the call up for the two-way with the Pacers. Looked like he was growing well as a prospect, and then in the G League and NBA level, it just never clicked. He only played in one game for the Pacers for 1 minute against Brooklyn, didn't do anything, zero stats, no nothing, but still was like a really high energy guy, a scrappy defender, looked like he could be something, and it just never really clicked. G League level, didn't even, he played for the Mad Ants early before the real G League season started, which is confusing. But he ended up playing for the Texas Legends and the Capital City Go-Go during the actual G League season. Was like an 11-point per game scored, ended up being a good passer. His steal rate wasn't as high as I thought it would be, considering his college stats. Nate Hinton was much, much better than DeJon Jarreau was this season. I think in retrospect, Hinton was more deserving of a two-way than Jarreau was for the Pacers. So the idea was there for Jarreau to be kind of this guard, on-ball, solid defender guy, and that never really clicked on an NBA level. 6'5" and skinny, really long, but it never clicked. And the Pacers like having guards on their two ways. That's something Chad Buchanan told me last year after the draft when I was talking to him at one of the press conferences. They like having guards on those two ways because dynamic guards can be a little more interchangeable and valuable at the NBA level. I need to pull up the exact quote. So it makes sense why they brought Jarreau in, and perhaps they bring in guards next year on two ways. But he just never really clicked at the NBA level or in the G League level, and that's why the Pacers cut him. That's why he's with a different organization now. In general, Ahmad Caver played in one game for the Pacers, 25-year-old who spent his G League time with the Memphis organization, with the Hustle. I love that team name. Most improved player in the G League last year, really blew up in scoring and became a 16 points per game guy, good passer, grew his passing a ton this year, got up to 8 assists per game, but his shot went away as his passing went up. So Pacers just needed a guy who could play really badly. Again, he played during the COVID hardship times they had in late December, early to mid-January. He only played in one game, mega garbage time, last minute against the Brooklyn Nets. If you'll remember that game, he scored to take the Nets lead from 9-7. And the line was Nets -8. So a lot of people were really upset with Ahmad Caver for scoring. He did not care at all. He got to play in the NBA for about 45 seconds and score right in Kevin Durant's face, which is, a story he'll never forget. So I don't think he's an NBA level player. He's 26 and it doesn't really shine in the G League. He's probably the worst player we're talking about today. But he had an impact on the Pacers season. It was a very cool story. It was very fun to talk to him about all that on his last day with the team. And I wish him the best. He's grown every year in the G League. Perhaps he's not done fighting for an NBA spot. He's made preseasons for the Grizzlies before. So maybe he's got a shot still. But of all these guys, I think he's the least likely guy to ever stick with the Pacers again. Jarreau, I don't know what his future holds. I don't know if the Pacers bring him back, but I think they would prefer him over Caver. The last guy, Reggie Perry. Reggie Perry. I think it's a guy who has an NBA future, an NBA level future. Maybe not with the Pacers, but if they were going to bring back anyone we're talking about today, I guess Hinton would be first. But Reggie Perry seems like at least an NBA level guy. He was a really, really highly rated prospect, pre-college. And he was still, at Mississippi State, he wasn't amazing, but he got drafted in 2020 by the Clippers, ends up playing his rookie season for the Nets. And he was in their playoff rotation. He played in 5 playoff games for Brooklyn that year. Reggie Perry's a quality dude who just couldn't quite stick on an NBA team last year. Played in one game for the Pacers. Again, hardship. They really needed him. They needed a big at that time. They had no Turner. They had no Sabonis. They had nobody available to play. 10 minutes he played for the Pacers. Did not miss a shot. Grabbed a rebound. Actually put stats up and scored unlike all the other guys we're talking about here. right? Like, he was fine for the Pacers and was good for the Nets as a rookie. Then in 9 games and a start with Portland this season, he averaged 10 points a game for the Blazers, right? Like, he played well in Portland, shot 50% from the field, over 5 rebounds a game in under 20 minutes. Like, Reggie Perry's an NBA level guy to me. He was on the Pacers for a little bit. If the Pacers need a really deep bench center, like if they do end up moving on from Turner, who we talked about earlier, or maybe they trade Goga or something, Reggie Perry as like your break glass in case of emergency center, you could do a lot worse than that, even though he was picked in the draft 2 years ago, only 22 years old. So, just turned 22 in March, by the way, like a young 22. So really, he was a pretty strong prospect in general. If you'll recall, when Ben Pfeiffer was on, like, there was a really strong Team USA team that played in the tournament, and there were a ton of high-level names on it. And Reggie Perry was the MVP of that tournament. Like, he was good in the draft class that year. Insane G League stats for the Raptors G League team this year. 11.1 rebounds and 20 points per game on really good shooting. Like, I think he's an NBA level dude who got in a game for the Pacers this year. And if they were going to bring back any of the one-game guys, he'd be the one that makes the most sense. Pretty limited as a defender, only 6'8" as a center. Like, those limitations are there. There's a reason he's not automatically sticking on any team, but he was the best of the one game played for the Pacers guys this year. So there we go. I got through the less than 5 games played crowd, ran through what their season was like and what their future could hold with the Pacers. We'll get back to more impactful players in future shows. Next one we'll do is Young Wings, Chris Duarte, O'Shea Brissett, and Dwayne Washington. We'll do that next week. We'll get back on either draft-related or free agency-related content tomorrow. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's show, especially talking about Myles Turner and his future with the team, as that is very topical news from Marc Stein. Thank you all a ton for listening, and we will see you tomorrow.